an absolute pleasure to be invited. It's funny sometimes people get, you get a certain title in your career and people think, oh, well, they have time. And both Alicia and I, started texting immediately upon receiving the invite, and we were both very enthusiastic to join because for us, making these connections, hearing from you, hearing your questions actually is critical to us and to making the connections to our work. So we'll try to answer your questions, but we're equally excited to hear your questions and think about where we need to go from here. So in terms of the DAP and the employment strategy more generally, as as policymakers and policy leaders, policy development is a journey. And so where we are today is the culmination of a number of years of work, including obviously the Accessible Canada Act, the Major Disability Conference, some of the roundtables we did during COVID. And then in last fall, we launched the DAP. And the DAP, I think you can Google this and get all the details, so I won't read it all out to you. But the DAP is kind of a framework for how does the government kind of looking forward want to tackle issues. And it's grounded in guiding principles, as all good framework does. Guiding principles of nothing about us without us, human rights focus, and as well as intersectionality as guiding principles, all very, very important. There are 5 objectives and 4 guiding principles or 4 pillars, and one of the 4 pillars is employment. And so that's where my job comes in. The employment pillar has kind of 3 outcomes. So why is this government person talking about all these boxes and frameworks? Well, for me, having led policy for many years in different aspects in government, it's really, really important to have a good policy framework to look back where you were, think about where you want to be, and continually evaluate your North Star on outcomes. And so that's what this policy framework is all about. It's about figuring out where do we want to be, where do we need to be, and kind of how do we get there. And, so the employment strategy, I did write this down to make sure I got it right. It has three parts. It's about finding jobs, advancing people in jobs, and creating more entrepreneurs. It's about employers being more disability confident and having better employment strategies for persons with disabilities. And it's about increasing the supply and capacity and outreach of organizations. And so it's kind of seems obvious when you hear it put that way, that those are the key ingredients to a policy framework. So then what? Then we need to start peeling the onion and thinking about the pieces of that and how do all the pieces fit together. Anyway, I can say more, but I'll stop there and come back with more
Yeah,
future.
no, that's great. Thanks, Colette. That gives us a good primer of understanding about where the employment strategy started and why it started where it started. So I thank you very much for that. And over to you, Alicia. Maybe you can speak about the history of the Canada Disability Benefits and how that has specifically come out of the Disability Inclusion Action Plan.
Sure. I'm told this is on. Can people hear me? Okay. So first of all, like Colette, really pleased to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to speak and to hear from you on the questions that are on your mind. So many of you are out there actually doing things that Colette and I sort of think about, but don't necessarily get an opportunity always to experience it firsthand. So this is tremendously helpful. So we've talked a little bit already about the Disability Inclusion Action Plan writ large, and as Colette mentioned, there are 4 pillars. 2 of those pillars are financial security and employment, and those are obviously naturally linked. We've also have inclusive and accessible communities, as well as modernizing the approach to disability within government. So all of these pillars are designed to work together, and they recognize that we can't look at an issue as complex as individuals with disabilities without taking both a social and an economic lens to the situation. But if we're talking specifically about financial security and employment, the disability benefit is sort of the key feature of the financial security pillar of the action plan. And the intent here is to really ensure that individuals have the resources that they need to bring themselves out of poverty and to be able to live kind of a full and inclusive life. And when you think about kind of financial security and employment, I mean, they are tied together. I mean, employment is one of the fundamental ways for individuals to have financial security, right? Both in terms of having kind of a regular income stream, but also an opportunity to gain additional skills, progress in your career, kind of build a foundation for yourself, and be like a full member of society. So when we think about the disability benefit, we want to make sure that we are not inadvertently creating any barriers for individuals who are on the benefit to then, if they're able to and want to work, to be able to go ahead and do that. So our teams are in very, very close contact and also speaking to employers, to provinces, to other stakeholders to make sure that when we design a benefit, we're not kind of out of kind intentions actually putting people in a tough situation if they do want to work.
So thank you for that. And that leads into my next question about how you're going to make sure that that doesn't happen. So, and again, so I'll just expand the question a little bit. So for those Canadians or people living in Canada that are on, that do qualify and receive the Canada Disability Benefit, what are the measures that you'll do to make sure that that does not preclude employment?
We're not starting from zero here. We've had a number of conversations as the DAP was being developed, and since then, and as we've talked more about the disability benefit, and there's really two key messages that have come back to us. One is that there are any number of existing income support programs out there, federally, provincially, that do include or ultimately potentially create these kind of barriers. Particularly, these are programs that are, I think, tend to be income tested. And I think that comes from a good place. It comes from the intent to make sure the benefits are going to the people who need them the most. But if you don't design those carefully enough, you could end up with a counterproductive result that if you're an individual, let's say, with a disability who's currently receiving some kind of benefit, maybe in the future get the Canada Disability Benefit. And if they go out there and they try to find employment, they realize that as they earn income, they tend to lose benefits, in some cases faster than the income is coming in from employment. And beyond the money, there are also a number of programs that also provide other types of supports. It could be a support person to help you get from place to place, subsidized transportation, access to medication, and so on, that is tied to your receipt of that income support. But if the income support goes away because you're working, you might also lose access to those other things, which can be even more devastating than the loss of the income itself. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind and that we design a program that both in its own right and as it combines with other programs doesn't result in that counterproductive and counterintuitive outcome. The other thing we've heard is that financial security is by itself sometimes a precondition to employment. Because there are some costs that come along with wanting to work, whether it's the cost of the clothing that you wear, how you get to work, any special equipment that you might need, sometimes the training that you have to obtain in order to get the certification that then gets you a job. And so our hope is that by rolling out the benefit, we're going to be able to create some of that foundational ability to live that then frees people and give them the capacity to even think about potentially pursuing employment.
Excellent, thank you. I've heard those words from you before, so it was nice to hear them again. Over to you for the next question, Colette. So in your vision, from your perspective, how do you see the Canada Disability Benefit supporting the employment pillar?
So as Alicia said so well, I mean, these pillars and these pieces are more like puzzle pieces than they are rigid pillars. And Maureen and I were chatting just before this, and I said I've learned making public policy that if there are rigid lines between how things work together, you're going to have gaps. And some overlap and blurry lines actually is what makes things work for individuals to make sure that people, there aren't cracks and spaces where things don't work together. So I completely see the Canadian Disability Benefit supporting the employment strategy, because getting to a job requires a certain level of assurance that if you're spending your time looking for something to eat, you're not going to have the ability to look for a job. And I learned that in my earliest days working in student financial services and seeing some of the impacts that can have on individuals getting to school. So, in terms of how employment measures work, employment measures too are a continuum. We work from everywhere from kind of pre-employability space all the way into kind of skill advancement and upskilling, and even into entrepreneurship, which sometimes isn't always in our portfolio, is in the old Industry Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, and we have to work with them. So it isn't even just about the measures that are under the purview of Minister Scara, previously Minister Qualtrough, Minister Boissonnault. It's about really looking at the measures in a whole of government way. So the work that the government is doing, or our department's doing on early childcare and development, absolutely critical for women with disabilities to have access, and parents with disabilities to have access to childcare. Absolutely, the affordable housing agenda is absolutely an intersectional kind of policy approach to make sure that we're supporting people to get into the labor market. And when I look at employment statistics and labor participation rates, I mean, I am spending so much time in terms of labor shortages. And when I see that if we increased participation rates of persons with disabilities to the average of other persons without disabilities, we would add 450,000 workers to the country immediately. So to me, if we focus only on immediate employment and we don't think about the continuum of measures and making sure they're worked together, we're simply not, we're losing ground, and we're going to end up spending more and more money on measures that actually could very well go into employment supports. We know that programs like the Opportunities Fund, which probably many are very familiar with, has a social return on investment for every dollar, and that program has a social return of $1.70. Skills and employment programming for a dollar invested has a return on investment for persons with disabilities of $4.40. And so we can talk more about all the different measures we have, but the employment strategy is so much more than the Opportunities Fund. It's about thinking about skills for success. It's thinking about programs like that. I met with an organization called the Canadian Career Development Foundation. Don't know if they're here today. That was telling a story about how they started a program in New Brunswick that was funded through our workforce development agreements with provinces. We transfer funds to provinces. A large portion of that funding goes to persons with disabilities. But what they were doing was they were trying to figure out how they were seeing skyrocketing social assistance costs in the province. And they were trying to come up with innovative ideas for how to help people get off social assistance. And then, so they had some pilots there, and then we funded that same organization through the Skills for Success program federally. And they told me a story the other day about an individual who, through this pilot measure, they came up with an employment support that was kind of like a multi-phase strategy that you could go at your own pace over a number of months. And one of the key pillars was about peer support networks. Okay, so this is not training. This is this individual who had diabetes and had lost his legs and had been a trucker and could no longer work in that industry. And because he was living in a home that didn't have proper accessibility supports, he became more and more depressed and was unable to work and had all these challenges. So through this funding, his peer support network, they helped him find a living arrangement where he could now, take better care of himself. And that gave him the self-confidence to then begin to pursue. And he's now currently at Algonquin College taking a course where he's going to be what's the proper word? Dispatcher for the trucking industry. So it goes to show that we really have to think of our whole continuum of programming and kind of how it works together. Now you're going to say, how do we help individuals navigate that? And that is a big problem and one that we're working on too. But if we think only in about this program and that program from an employment perspective, we're never going to get there. We have to keep connecting the dots.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with you, Colette. Because as you know, in this room, back in 2019, we celebrated the Pan-Canadian Strategy for Disability and Work. And can you maybe draw some parallels between the new federal strategy and the Pan-Canadian strategy?
Sure. So I was actually just rereading your Pan-Canadian strategy in preparation for this conference. And I wasn't in this job at that time. I've only been here for about 8 months, but I really find the Pan-Canadian strategy, a great example of kind of a simple framework coupled with comprehensive measures that really kind of reinforce each other and where we need to go. So the federal strategy, I think, on the employment strategy, I don't think it's different. Is it exactly the same? Probably not, because it's coming at it from the lens of kind of government and how we see, how we need to work with employers and what we're trying to do with employers and what we're trying to do actually for our own employees, as well as all the different kind of tools and measures we have for workers. So I've spent most of my career up until now, when I say working for businesses. So I've worked in Industry Canada, worked on small business policy, worked in large business policy, worked in other areas. And now I get to work for workers. And, what I've learned is actually, even though they're so obviously two sides of the same coin, there are kind of gaps in that, and we need to keep working on that. And so a key part of what we've been working on for the employment strategy is the Disability Inclusion Business Council, which many of you may have heard of. And over the past a year or so, starting under Minister Qualtrough and under the continued leadership of Minister Kara, we've been working with these business leaders to think about how do we accelerate and incubate a business-led network to help businesses help each other to work with persons with disabilities. And I won't scoop anything, but I'll just say stay tuned for next week for some news there. But this group is also there to help provide advice to the minister around the needs of businesses. So that too is a journey, and we're learning that there's amazing leadership in the country for sure among our business leaders that are committed to this, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but because it's a smart thing to do. We know our businesses that are inclusive and diverse do better, have better morale, have better outcomes. And it's very exciting to see that business leaders in our country are committed to that. At the same time, getting to disability confident is a challenge. I mean, we have at ESDC, Tina Nemciowski is the federal champion for employees with disabilities. And, we have work to do inside the federal government too. So for the government to look at employers and say, this is what you need to be doing. Actually, we need to support each other in that.
Good. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, we'll keep our ears open. We'll keep our eyes open for announcements coming next week. So over to you, Alicia. Now, you've said that the benefit is really part of the overall strategy of the government. But can you tell us what you will be taking into account when you develop the benefit? And if you can, it would be really good for people here, I think, it would be great if you could focus a little bit on injured workers as well, and how the benefit would work for injured workers.
Thanks, Maureen. So we're working to develop the benefit. We are guided by the legislation, the Canada Disability Benefit Act, which received royal assent back in June. And the legislation tells that there are a number of factors that we have to take into account when we develop the benefit. Those include, obviously, the additional costs associated with disabilities. It includes the official poverty line, and includes income from employment. So that's item now. as well as the intersectional needs of disadvantaged groups, and Canada's international human rights obligations. So all of those things are informing how we think about developing the benefit. We've already talked about the interactions, the both desired and undesired between benefit programs and other things that are going on in people's lives. So we want to think about those and make sure that we are, as we've talked about, not designing something that is flawed from the get-go. Then in terms of any kind of benefit program, we need to think about how do we deliver this in a way that's actually accessible to people. And in particular, in a benefit that is targeting individuals with disabilities, we have to make sure that it's accessible by design. It's not something that we want to start rolling out and then think, oh, we really should have made this more accessible for people, right? And so we're looking at everything. We're looking at what the application process needs to look like. What documentation are we going to ask people to submit? What format can that take? How do we help people navigate the program? We know that government initiatives in general can be seen as very bureaucratic and technical and very, very difficult to understand. So how do we address that upfront? Who do we allow to make an application? What are the timelines? What does an appeal process look like when individuals disagree with something that the government has decided? Obviously, principles of natural justice says there has to be a way to have the file reviewed. But again, we want to make sure that that's accessible and transparent, and that everybody who see themselves as potentially eligible has an avenue in order to make kind of the best possible case. Now, you asked about injured workers. And so again, in the conversation that we've been having, we've heard loud and clear that there are concerns from people who are potentially injured on work or off work, unable to work right now, in receipt of some other kind of financial support, whether it's a provincial program, whether it's private insurance. So they're excited about the potential for this new benefit to come on board and help them out. But they're also worried that if I make an application for this thing, how is that going to impact my potential eligibility for other things? And again, we know that that's not always the most transparent thing. You can't just go on a website and click, if I combine A, B, and C, this is going to be my outcome, right? And people are worried that they may not know when they're applying for our benefit, how it might be impacting something else that they're already getting. So we're very, very conscious of that. We've been very proactively reaching out to our colleagues in provinces and territories to talk to them about their programs, to make it clear to them that our program is intended to be an income supplement program and not an income replacement program. And I know that sounds bureaucratic and boring, but it's actually kind of important because an income replacement program effectively says that you can't earn X, and so we are giving you Y. And so if you start stacking these things on top of each other, you might actually end up getting more than X, and some are going to see that as a problem. In our case, it's very much intended as an income supplement. So it says, okay, you're already getting X, we want our Y to be on top, right? And so when we talk particularly to the private insurance industry, that actually resonates with them. However, they very naturally have told us we actually need to see the details before we can tell you for sure how we're going to treat it. And so this is why we're going to stay in very, very close contact with them as the details come out to make sure that they understand what we're doing and that we're able to identify any potential issues and address them.
That, and the intention and the whole intention of the benefit, right? Which I've heard you say it's a safety net. I've heard you say it's not income replacement and that it is a benefit. So I appreciate that. And then just keeping with you, Alicia, the big question and the one I think is most frequently asked of you is, and you touched on how do you get the benefit because you talked about the forms, but how much and when is it coming? Any insight?
So yeah, that's a good question. I knew you were going to ask me that. So we've already talked about the act that gave rise to the benefit. And the act is what we call framework legislation. And we've used the word framework here before today. But in this context, framework legislation means that the act essentially creates the concept of the benefit. It includes some principles, some of the things that we have to take into account. And then it creates authorities for the government to actually identify the parameters for the benefit through regulations. Those regulations are currently in development, and so there isn't a complete answer to that question. What I can tell you is that the Act imposes certain obligations on us. In terms of timing, the Act has to come into force within a year of royal assent. So that takes us to, at the latest, June 2024. Then we have a further year to actually introduce the regulations. So that means that at the very latest, the regulations have to go live by June 2025. And so we're currently in the process of designing those regulations. There is an engagement process because the Act also tells us that we have to engage in a meaningful and barrier-free way with the disability community as we develop the regulations. That was always our intent, but it's great that it's in the Act because it actually kind of gives it the force of law. And so since the summer, we have been engaging in a series of roundtables. Some have been led by the minister, Minister Kira, our new Minister for Diversity and Inclusion. Some have been led by officials of a more technical nature, looking at some aspects of the benefit, like the application process, like the additional costs associated with disability and so on. I'm happy to say that we've also recently launched an online tool that allows individual Canadians to opine on the design of the regulations. It's available on the Canada Disability Benefit website. I hope that some of you have already had an opportunity to look at it. We've received well over 1,000 responses so far. We're very, very pleased with that. We'd like to get more. The tool is available until the 21st of December. So please tell your networks, tell them that it's out there, because we really want to hear from everyone who has a view on this. We're also open to additional feedback about how we can also continue to engage in this space. From a technical perspective, regulations will be introduced in the Canada Gazette, Part 1. They'll be open for a comment period, typically around 60 to 65 days, after which we will combine that feedback, adjust as appropriate, and then publish the regulation in a Part 2 of the Gazette, at which point they effectively become a thing. In addition to all of this, we also need to make sure that we have enough time to build and design and implement the delivery system for this benefit. So we need a system that allows people to make an application, to gather the information that we will need, for us to verify to our satisfaction that the information is correct, and then to actually sort of identify that someone is eligible and issue them payment. The runway for developing a system like that, for that can potentially apply to tens or hundreds of thousands of potential applicants, is measured in months, not in days or weeks. So we have to make sure that there's enough time for us to do all of this, to meaningfully engage, do the regulation development, but also build the system so that it's ready to go. And in the context to all of this, we know that there are people out there who need the benefits now. They can't wait for us to drag our feet and to do all of the bureaucratic things that we love to do in order to get like the perfect benefit out there, right? And so we're very much focused on doing this as quickly as we can. We have these deadline imposed by the Act, but if we can do it sooner, we'd like to do that.
He didn't say how much. He's clever.
You can invite him back next year. Maybe he'll know more.
Okay, sounds good. So Colette, I did have another question, but I really want to push it to the group. And I think what I will do is I'm going to come out, I'm going to run the mic. So, oh no, Samira has a mic. So I see Tammy, then I saw Neil, then I saw Steve, but I was only facing in this direction. And I see a hand in the back over there as well.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Tammy Yates Rajaduri. I'm the Executive Director of Realize, and we host the National Episodic Disabilities Forum. So I'm putting this question out and anyone can respond. In the context of the disability benefit, of course, we know that people living with episodic disabilities often fall through the cracks because of the challenges around the binary definitions of, eligibility in terms of disability benefits. So in the context of the disability benefit, how are you ensuring that people living with episodic disabilities will perhaps have, in the same way that CPPD now has, automatic reinstatement?
Thank you. I think that probably question is for me. Excellent point. And this is an ongoing conversation that we've been having in the community for many, many years. We know that not all disabilities are the same. They apply in different ways to different people. Some are permanent, some are severe but temporary and can be resolved. Others, as you said, Tammy, are episodic. They flare up. Someone has to go off of work for a while they're dealing with that disability, and then potentially then be able to come back to work. As I've said earlier, our intent with the disability benefit is not to create a system that forces people into that binary choice to either be disabled or to be employed. How you do that, the devil is all within the details. I think we also have to recognize that because we do want to get that benefit out there as quickly as we can, we may not be able to deal with all issues right out of the box. Having said that, one of the things that we are looking to get through the engagement that we're currently undertaking is a better understanding of what does it actually mean for some of the people who are dealing with this situation. What do they look like? What are the time periods over which somebody might be episodically disabled? We know it's different. We know there's not going to be a single definition, but we want to make sure that whatever we put out there is, first of all, it's going to be clear. We don't want to create uncertainty for people. And we also understand the needs that if somebody is considered eligible and then the status changes, that we know how to deal with that. And that if he changes back again, that we're not necessarily forcing them to go through the entire process from the get-go if we've never had to deal with them before.
Thank you. Neil?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Neil Walanja. I'm with Indigenous Disability Canada, and thank you for the presentation. And it's good to see you all again. I have a number of questions. Hopefully, you can answer. The first one is in relation to the Accessible Canada Act, and Alicia, I think the last time we were in a meeting, I kind of brought this up as well. Is the 5,000 jobs that the government is going to put in there? Now, I've heard rumors that this is only by attrition. I don't know if that's true. So as people retire, they may hire persons with disabilities, but maybe give me an update or give us an update on that. I'm particularly interested in persons from the deaf community that the government's hiring, Indigenous people with disabilities, how you're reaching out and making sure they're in there. And and certainly it wouldn't be by attrition. I wouldn't think that you're waiting for government employees to quit or retire before you fill this. So it's been quite some time. It'd be interesting to have those numbers there as well. In relation to employment ready or disability ready employers, again, I'm interested from, what work's been done with Indigenous communities, First Nations communities, Inuit communities, Métis charter communities, disability organizations to make sure that they are ready, or Indigenous organizations make sure they're ready. The Canada Disability Benefit. So great benefit, historic, generational changing for sure. Announced 3 years ago. We just saw Minister Freeland talk about nothing during the fall economic statements, which I think has really caused concern within the disability community, particularly a portfolio that could be anywhere from 18 to $20 billion a year annually, and no indication of moving forward. So I think that causes some concern here. After 3 years, I mean, for me personally, I would be hesitant to believe that the government doesn't have a number that they're looking at. And now we're doing roundtables. And I think I expressed this last time in a minister's meeting is that I believe the government has a number. And now they're doing a roundtable talking about the individual cost for disability. And I don't think that number is going to change. I think to be transparent, you should indicate what that number is and then make sure that the individual cost of disability is included on that afterwards. But without being transparent in that number, we'll say, for example, it's $1,500. You'll then say, or I worry that the government will say, well, it's $1,200 supplement, and then we're going to add $300 on for the cost per person. I think that's the wrong way to do it, and I think you need transparency. And I do believe the government has that number. The other thing is when we're talking about employment within the provinces and territories and the exemptions that come through there, I'd be interested to see what kind of work's being done. For example, in BC, we have a $1,600 exemption for employment for persons with disabilities without it affecting their provincial benefits. what kind of conversations are you having with the provinces and territories to make sure that those things are in place as well? Or that can you use your pressure to get provinces and territories to get some kind of comparable level like that as well? And how will that impact on sorry, Maureen, how will that impact on
So we just don't have time to answer all your questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know they're really important questions, Neil. I know I'm not, please do not think that I don't.
if I was traveling on a
We have
train
6
from
minutes.
Calgary and I'm going,
6 minutes. We have 6 minutes. We've got a couple of other hands.
there's a lot more questions, and
no.
those are all very important questions because we don't know, and I think.
Put your mic, we can't hear you without the mic.
Those are all very important
Yep,
questions,
they are.
and I really appreciate you being there and being put under pressure, but without transparency here, and the government does this, they say, this is a great thing to do. My biggest fear is this, is that we're going to have this Canada Disability Benefit. It's gonna take 2 years before it even gets to past regulation stage. Then it's gonna be rolled out federally first, and provinces and territories will have to wait until another 2 or 3 years before that comes out. That means persons with disabilities who are working or who are living in poverty are going to have to wait this long. And that's where transparency comes out. And quite frankly, we've had none, zero. And
So
that's the problem.
How about we ask that question about the transparency and about any decisions that have been made that you are that you've heard, or the feedback that you've heard in the direction that you're taking.
And Neil, thank you for those questions. And I agree, they're important questions. And I wish we had more time. Now you're going to have to invite me next year, Maureen. You don't have a choice. I have a long list of things to get back to everybody on. Totally hear you, Neil, in terms of transparency. Obviously, no decision has been made. As I said, the regulations are being developed. We are out consulting, and we're consulting because we actually want to hear what people have to say. Now, we're not starting from zero, right? We have had many, many conversations, and which is why we're trying to focus the conversation we're having now on those elements of the benefit design that we haven't heard as much of. So yeah, it's true. We've heard a lot already about kind of the particular needs of individuals living with disabilities, but those haven't necessarily been quantified. And the Act says that we have to take that into account. So we've been talking to people about that. We're talking to them about the application process because we actually do want it to be as accessible as possible. Until we actually get that input, we're not really in a position to help the government kind of completely nail down how they want to deal with it. But we've heard the message loud and clear that we can't wait forever. The Act imposes certain obligations on us. We have to work within those obligations. We'd like to do it sooner. But this is where we have to balance kind of the different objectives here. How do we do something that is actually in partnership with the disability community and not just government imposing something, but how do we do it fast enough that it actually puts money into people's pockets when they need it?
Colette, do you want to take a stab at the 5,000?
Well, I actually don't know the number. I think I should. I will follow up and look into that. But I mean, I think the short answer is no, we're not waiting for attrition. As a matter of fact, even within my own branch, we're piloting a program for high potential persons with disabilities come into the public service at senior officials or at more senior analyst levels, experimenting with that. There are many, many pieces. I think that's the challenge with the employment strategy and your point about programming for Indigenous peoples. We run the ISET program, the Indigenous Skills and Employment Program. We have ISET holders across the country where we co-develop priorities. They are responsible for identifying the priorities, and absolutely there's a focus on persons with disabilities in those measures. So how we start to kind of connect the dots between all these measures and show the sum of the parts, keep piloting and experimenting, but also then pivoting those into longer term strategies. So we're not kind of continually coming up with best practices, but never turning them into ongoing standard practices for everyone. And we're going through that within the federal public service as well.
Okay, thank you. So unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes. So Steve, I hope that your question is not as long as Neil's. And
I love competing with Neil.
I know.
I can never reach the standard, but it's worth trying. Steve Mantis with the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. And my question is around the Canada Disability Benefit and really the integration with workers' compensation. We do have a lot of concerns really based on what we know already, how other federal programs integrate or don't with workers' compensation. So right now, we're working on an issue of what happens when people turn 65. We have recent research out of University of Waterloo, Public Health, that many of these workers with a permanent disability end up in poverty when they turn 65. And partially it is about the poor integration of benefits from workers' compensation to the GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement. So when we kind of think about the future, we have to look at what is the past and how does that work now? And it seems like it's an issue that no one is really paying attention to. And we kind of go, if we're not paying attention to the shortcomings now, how are we going to be able to move forward with a new benefit? And I certainly don't envy you in your discussions with the provinces, but I really hope that those discussions go well and wondering how are we going to kind of do that integration when we may not have willing partners?
Excellent question. I touched on this a little bit earlier. We are paying attention. We do want to make sure that the integration is as seamless as possible. We know that it may not be able to do that in every province all the time because there is such a diversity of different programs, approaches, initiatives, different eligibility criteria. It's very, very complicated. To that end, we've been having very proactive conversation with the provinces. As I said earlier, we have made it clear to them that the intent here is a supplement and not replacement. We've said the same to the private insurance industry. Again, the initial response has been, okay, we get it. We even approve of it, but we are going to need to see the specific details so that we can walk through what all the implications are. And so that's still to come, but please keep asking the question because it keeps our feet squarely to the fire on it.
Great. So that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you.